And so the idea here is that just because you read about some statistical study doesn't mean necessarily you should be believing the results. You'll want to know multiple facets about how the study was conducted before you believe the results. So what you guys see a lot of in the media is like, especially in election years, is polling studies. And polls conducted by different agencies can differ wildly from each other. So if you look at a presidential poll conducted by CNN versus a presidential poll conducted by Fox, you might see wildly different results. And so in that case, you want to take into account the agency who's conducting the poll, right? CNN generally has a different group of viewers politically than Fox News does. They often, when they conduct polls, will conduct them within their viewership base rather than a random sample. And their viewership base may not be representative of the country as a whole. So oftentimes you would want to, if you really want better data, take a look at a third-party agency like Pew or Gallup. These are giant independent statistical centers that conduct studies and polls. You guys know what Snopes is? You do? Yeah, it's like one of the earliest fact-checking websites, but it's a good one. It's if you hear something you think might be specious, you can go here. So Matt Gaetz has been in the news. And you can just basically type it in, and they'll give you a third-party fact check on whatever it is that you want. I'm trying to think of what was a good urban legend. This was really useful. Like, what do you want to know about 5G? Okay, so 5G. Let's see, 5G vaccine. How do you spell vaccine? Is it two X's? Oh,
it's
yeah.
two C's.
Okay, relax. Is COVID 5G? Is this a COVID 5G chip diagram? This picture. And the answer is false. But yeah, Snopes is a great fact-checking website. Just if you hear something you think might be specious, they cite their sources, and they've always been pretty reliable. So that's where the Snopes it before you post it, or Snopes it before you share it. There was one I was trying to think of, but like when like boomers, my parents, not my parents specifically, actually my wife's parents, would send around these like chain emails that were just nonsense, like sort of uplifting stories. And her dad like sent one. It was like written in 20 different fonts and had 19 different colors on it. And it like told the story about how a bald eagle will shed its wings and regrow them. And I was like, Aaron, and she was like, that story was cool, huh? And I was like, that sounds insane and I don't believe it. And I wonder if I could find it. Eagle shed wings. Oh, here, I think this is it. The rebirth of the eagle. Let's see. According to a popular website, eagles extend their lifespans by removing their beaks, talons, and feathers in order to grow new ones. Yeah, so anyways. So today we're just going to give you some guidelines for how to, things that you should check into before you buy into any statistical study. So I'm going to give you 8 guidelines, and then I'll kind of go into detail on those guidelines. Make sure that you write down the 8 guidelines, but you don't have to verbatim write down every bullet point about the guideline. We're just going to kind of talk about them. So guideline 1 is get a big picture view of the study, which is going to involve trying to answer these questions. What's the goal of the study? What's the population? And was it clearly defined? And what type of study was used? And was that appropriate? Did we watch that John Oliver clip this year? I'm trying to find this. He does a really good example of debunking a study, and it's based on, so you'll often see it in advertising and breakfast cereal advertising. They do all sorts of nonsense, and they'll claim like students who eat Cookie Crisp for breakfast are 90% more attentive or whatever. Let me see if I can find it. All right. Guideline 2 is consider the source. This is huge. Again, so this is the CNN Fox News thing. And also kind of goes with the breakfast cereal. Consider the source. Are they conducting the study, and are the results, do they benefit them somehow? Oh, God. All right. And then we want to look for bias in the sample. So selection bias occurs when researchers select their sample in a way that it tends to make it unrepresentative of the population. So this could be like, if you're doing a political survey and you only call listed landlines to do the survey. You guys know what a landline is? Okay. You're going to have some selection bias because what types of people have landlines? Older people mostly, right? And so you're systematically eliminating then younger people who don't have a landline from your sample, which is going to introduce some bias into your sample. Ooh, Godzilla versus Kong is out today. I know what I'm doing later. I'm trying to find this John Oliver study, but it's only on HBO Max now. I think it's from his first ever episode. It'd be worth taking a look at here. And then participation bias happens when people choose whether or not to participate. So this is surveys. All will have participation bias, right? People who feel strongly about an issue are more likely to participate, and their opinions may not represent the larger population. I like to refer to this also as the Yelp effect, which is when you go into Yelp, most places have either like 5-star or 1-star reviews. There's not a whole lot of people that take the time to participate and rate an experience they had that was fine, unmemorable. So you're not getting representation from the whole population. You're just getting people who are either outraged or had a great time. All right, come on now. All right. Guideline 4, look for problems in defining or measuring the variable of interest. So variable is anything that can take on different values. And the variable of interest in a statistical study are the things that the study seeks to measure. But they can oftentimes be a little muddy and not easy to objectively measure. The other day we did an example where we were talking about students misbehaving. Well, what does misbehaving mean? That's not exactly an objective measurement that we can make. Misbehaving may mean something completely different to you than it does to me, than it does from another person. So
but incredibly.
okay, I found the clip. All right, let's look at an example. A commonly quoted statistic is that law enforcement authorities succeed in stopping only about 10% to 20% of the illegal drugs entering the United States. So that's 80 to 90% actually get in. Should you believe this statistic? What do you guys think? Does that seem reasonable? Why not, Colin?
Because how would they know about the drugs that entered the United States?
100%. 100% correct. The answer is no. And sometimes these types of statistics are referred to as PFTA, meaning pulled from thin air. How would they know? To be able to know that they only stop about 20%, the people who are getting the other 80% in would have to offer up that information, right? And since they're illegal, they're probably not just going, hey, I got these drugs here. So no, this is just a completely made up statistic. There would be no way to know how many are actually coming in to the United States illegally. All right, fifth guideline, beware of confounding variables. We talked about this the other day when I was talking about that religious people live longer lives, which is true. But does that mean that religion is causing them to live longer lives? Like the act of believing in a higher being, is that causing them to live longer lives? Not necessarily. It's confounded with other things that may be associated with the religion, right? Like not drinking alcohol or not doing drugs that tend to be rules within many of the world's larger religions, right? So confounding variables are just variables that make it difficult rather to interpret the results properly. Consider the setting and the wording in surveys. So there are so many things that can go wrong in surveys. So you can get something called response bias, right? I think I talked about this a little bit. So I'm trying to see how many calories the average person consumes at McDonald's. And I let them know as they come in, like, hey, can I grab your receipt when you're done ordering? I want to see how many calories you're eating. That may influence what they decide to purchase. So that's a response bias situation. Wording of surveys can be confusing. There's a great example from a New York Times survey from like 1996, where they were trying to get a survey on how many people were Holocaust deniers, basically. How many people thought that the Holocaust didn't really happen? But the way they worded the question was, is it or is it not plausible that the Holocaust didn't happen? And so people were like, yeah or no? Because they worded the question in an extremely confusing way with a double negative, right? And so they ended up getting results where like 40% of the public were Holocaust deniers. And they were like, whoa. But then they reworded the question and resubmitted the survey, and it turned out only like 5%, which is still insanely high that 5% of people think that the Holocaust didn't happen, but much less than 30, right? So wording of the question is important. The other thing that's important with surveys is survey fatigue. If you have like 10 questions in your survey, people get annoyed by having to take surveys. So by the 10th one, they're tuned out. So if you don't want that bias to be included, what you actually have to do is create the survey to have multiple orders of the question so that people are getting them in a different order and they're not just all systematically, marking the same thing on number 10 just because they want to be done with the survey or whatever it is. All right. Here's another example. The Republican National Committee commissioned a poll to find out whether Americans supported their proposed tax cuts. They asked, do you favor a tax cut? And a large majority answered yes. Should we conclude that Americans supported the proposal? And so what's trying to be pointed out here is that the way they worded it I would say not necessarily. And that's just due to the wording of the question. They're not talking about what's going on with their proposal, right? They're not discussing, okay, you can get a tax cut at the expense of these public programs, or we're going to have to shut down the parks, or we're not going to have as much money for infrastructure. They're just saying, do you want a tax cut? Well, yeah. Do you guys want more money? Sure. Okay, but I'm going to kick a puppy if I give you the tax cut. Okay, well then no. Right? You have to know all the surrounding details. Guideline 7, check that the results are presented fairly. This is maybe a good time for us to watch the John Oliver clip on breakfast cereals. Let me just make sure that this is the right. I think that this is it.
Extremely two fun facts.
Oh yeah, it is.
First,
all right.
incredibly.
Give me a moment here. Aiden said, I just got back from the bathroom to hear, but I'm going to kick a puppy. Are you good? All right, hold on. I apologize if there's any swearing or anything like that in this.
Which made other companies say, well, we can say what we want. Okay, let's do exactly that then. Which is why Holmes once felt they could put a smart choice label on their mayonnaise, and Cocoa Krispies boasted that they could increase your child's immunity, which is true, but only in the sense that it immunizes them from not having diabetes. It's extremely rare for companies to be called to account for any of this. For instance, a few years ago, Kellogg's was forced to stop airing this ad.
A clinical study showed kids who had a filling breakfast of frosted and eaten cereal improved their attentiveness by nearly 20%.
All right, so this is a great example. A clinical study. They're couching this whole thing as, hey, here's some statistical facts for you, right? So a couple of the guidelines that we should look at first. A clinical study by who? Kellogg's themselves. Do the results benefit them somehow? Yes. This is showing that it's good for kids, right? Maybe we should be a little bit suspicious of it. Now, increased attentiveness. That's kind of a muddy variable. What does that even mean? How would you measure increased attentiveness? So all of these things are things that we should look at this and be suspicious of.
Two fun facts there. First, when they say nearly 20%, it's because they're rounding up from 11. And secondly, they were comparing kids who eat the cereal with a control group of kids who had no breakfast at all. And that is not so much against the mini wheats as
Sorry.
it is opposite the foods. A much fairer slogan would be frosted mini wheats. They're literally better than nothing. Clearly. We are now at a point where food companies feel no obligation to accurately represent what is in their products.
All right. So that's just a good example of a misleading statistical study. Where are we at here? And an example of study being misrepresented in concluding statements. All right, the school board in Boulder, Colorado created a hubbub when it announced that 28% of Boulder school children were reading below grade level, and hence concluded that the methods of teaching reading needed to be changed. The announcement was based on reading tests on which 28% of Boulder children scored below the national average for their grade. Do these data support the board's conclusion? No. And the reason being, the national average is just that. It's right in the middle. So about what percent of children should you expect to fall below any national average score? Where is an average? Where does it fall in a data set? In the middle, right? How much of the data will fall below the average? Half, which is what percent? 50%, right? So if it's the national average score, you would expect about half the data to fall below it and half the data to fall above it. So in this particular school, really only 28% of them are below the national average. So I would argue that they're actually doing better than most schools, right? Because you would expect about, in an average school, about half the children to score below the national average, about half them to score above the national average. The average is right in the middle. So I would say no. They're doing a bunch of hand-wringing because they had 28% of students score below the national average, when the reality is we should expect about 50% to score below the national average. Does that logic make sense? Okay. So we would expect about half of all students to score below the national average. So my answer there is no. They're freaking out, and changing the curriculum doesn't align with the statistics that they're reporting. Oh, okay. Guideline 8, stand back and consider the conclusions. Did the study achieve its goals? Do the conclusions make sense? Can you rule out alternative explanations? And if the conclusions do make sense, do they have any practical significance? So I think we have a good example to kind of talk about if the conclusions do make sense, do they have any practical significance? So there's a difference between statistical significance and practical significance. Statistical significance just means that the results were unlikely to have occurred by random chance, okay? And so when you're doing an experiment, if you can rule out random chance as an answer for why something happened, then generally the only other option is your treatment must have caused the outcome, right? Which is maybe what you're trying to prove. My treatment causes this outcome. But just because an experiment has statistical significance, meaning you can rule out random chance, doesn't mean it has any practical significance. So let's talk about that in this example. So an experiment is conducted in which the weight loss of people who try a new fast diet supplement are compared to the weight losses of a control group of people who are just trying to lose weight in other ways. After 8 weeks, the results show that the treatment group lost an average of a ½ pound more than the control group. So they're saying the results showed that. That's statistical significance. But is that practically significant? A ½ pound? 8 weeks? I mean, your body will fluctuate by a ½ pound between breakfast and lunch. You know what I mean? So do you want to be taking a pill over 8 weeks to lose a ½ pound? No, I mean, you could take a shower and like wash the dirt off and lose a ½ pound. So there really isn't any practical significance. Meaning, yeah, maybe the pill is causing you to lose an extra ½ pound, but that's not going to do a lot for anybody. Okay. Folks, I think we did it. Got a good chunk of time here.